Hi, beloveds. Carlos here. Oh, what a great discussion we're looking forward to having today. We're going to return to our story, not his story, but our story. And we begin with a conversation I had just the other day. And me and another brother, we were discussing how do we how do we get better as a people? What do we need to do? We find ourselves at the bottom of every socioeconomic indicator. What do we need to do? And the brother said to me, Carlos, we just need to build businesses. We need to have our own economic center, just like XYZ, right? And he named another culture. Doesn't really matter for this discussion. We got to build our economic center. We don't have an economic center. We need to build an economic center. To which I said, again, again. Again. The main thing that I want to do with this Yawaba channel, Young, Wealthy, and Black Academy channel, and also with our people is we can no longer be ahistorical. We just can't do it. We keep falling into foolishness and foolish discussions, and foolish discussions lead to foolish actions because I don't believe we know our history. And this is a lot of the reason why I dare to start a wealth building academy, a wealth building movement with history. Because I think we have to realize we find ourselves in this place because of some terrorism enacted against us in our history. And we don't want to repeat the negative parts of our history, but we want to hold dearly to the positive parts. So we begin with our story of Omar. So Omar, he's born in 1910 in Louisiana. He's a sharecropper by the time he's age 5. But by the time he's age 35, he is a lawyer in the Treme area of New Orleans. More on that later. You see, Omar is the great-great-grandson of Guyasi. Remember, we talked about Guyasi. He was captured in his village north of Slave River, and he found himself in those dungeons, those horrible, horrid dungeons of the enslaver. After his trip across the Atlantic, he found himself in Louisiana, and our dear brother Guyasi was bred to have 12 children on that plantation in Louisiana, 8 of which were mulatto. So how could he have mulatto children? Do you understand what mulatto is? Do you understand mulatto is a mix between black and white? How could this be? Well, he was forced to procreate with the daughter of the enslaver. Isn't that heinous? Can you imagine? I just don't understand that mindset. Not really trying to understand that mindset, only to the extent that it affects us. This is a people, this is a people that thought us less than human. So if you think us less than human, why would you have your wife, your daughters, your cousins, why would you procreate with us if you think so little of us? But I always say it's not what they think of us. It doesn't matter what they think of us. It matters what we think of us. And that's what this story is all about. How do we get to always remembering, getting back to our memory of before, getting back to our members, putting ourselves back together from before. How do we get back to that? Well, we get back to it with our story. So I continue. Omar, born in 1910, is a great great grandson of Guyasi, and he was one of 8 mulatto children. Guyasi gained freedom upon his enslaver's death in 1863. This was common where at times the enslaver would put in their will to free their children, particularly children born of their progeny, right? So that's to make that their children free. And so this is what happened with Guyase. Guyase, he didn't sit on his laurels. He didn't just give up. He actually joined this new organization called the Freedmen's Bureau. More on that in a minute. Now, one of the 12 children, Frank, now this is Omar's grandfather, was born in 1860. He also survived the 1866 New Orleans Massacre. This is why we have to know our we have to know our story. This massacre came about as a response to President Johnson at the time having the nerve to want these newly freed former enslaved people to have just a little bit of rights. Right? Omar is, as I said, the great great grandson of Guyase, and he is the great grandson now, of Frank. Frank was born in New Orleans in 1860. Frank begat Sam in 1877, who begat Massey in 1894. Massey was a beautifully adorned troglodyte woman, and unfortunately, she was raped by the owner of the land where she and her family sharecropped. So she begat 5 children, 2 of which were mulatto, and 3 were to her husband. So 2 of those mulatto children, as I said before, were born indeed of this heinous crime of rape. Again, we find rape in our history. And then from these ill beginnings, actually, Omar was born, and Omar is light enough to pass. Can you imagine? I mean, can you imagine being at the turn of the century here in New Orleans? Can you imagine Omar in 1910 as he was born, all of the things that this young man would see? I think sometimes we make it like we'll say things like our ancestors, and they are our ancestors. But Omar would be equivalent to someone's great grandfather today. That doesn't make it so long ago. So just in Omar's life, Omar is the son of a sharecropper, and Omar is also the great grandson of someone who was enslaved. Just in that short time span is what I'm trying to get across to you. We have from enslavement to sharecropping. Now, what was sharecropping? You do understand that sharecropping was this institution, another heinous institution that was put in after Reconstruction. Reconstruction being when, for a brief period, there was some civility being given to those who were formerly enslaved. Oh, but the South, and oh, but this United States, we couldn't have that. So what we enacted, what the United States enacted was this situation where those former enslaved could work on plantations, perhaps even a plantation where they were once a slave. They could till the soil, they could work the farm, and they can produce crops for the landowner in exchange, right? So the exchange was their labor, and over time, they would be able to earn back tools and land implements that might have been used for cropping. These deals that were struck, I mean, it was in excess of 70, 80% interest on these implements. So this was just a criminal activity that was going on called sharecropping. So Omar indeed at the age of 5 was a sharecropper. I want you to think about it though. I want you to think about how not long ago this was. These events, these terrorist events that were born of Omar and Omar's mother, grandmother, great grandparents. This wasn't that long ago. Let's get into this New Orleans massacre. So, like I said before, the New Orleans massacre, I'll read. I'm reading from Black Past, and I'll put it right above here. The New Orleans Massacre, also known as the New Orleans Race Riot, occurred on July 30th, 1866. While the riot was typical of numerous racial conflicts during Reconstruction, this incident had special significance. It galvanized national opposition to the moderate Reconstruction policies of President Andrew Johnson and ushered in much more sweeping congressional Reconstruction in 1867. So from this terrorist act, the mild Reconstruction implements of Johnson was actually heightened. So this was a good thing. Unfortunately, as usual in our past, it had to come about from this massacre in 1866, where over 100 of our foremothers and forefathers were killed. Here I'm just showing you the actual document of the Congress of the United States. And you see that it's signed by President Johnson and signed by the Vice President as well. This Reconstruction Amendment went from 1865 to 1870, and it's also known as Amendments 13 through 15. We also spoke of the Freedmen's Bureau. So the connection between the Freedmen's Bureau and Reconstruction is that massacre in New Orleans was actually born of a protest from the Freedmen's Bureau. So there was a growing collection of these freed black men, and they didn't sit on their laurels. They actually created a Freedmen's Bureau, and they were the ones who also, after the abolition of enslavement, they were the ones that enacted different schools, getting farms, they were the ones that were causing us to gain more and more of our freedom. Because you see, freedom without an economic component, it's just not freedom. What do I mean? I'm saying if you're in 1865, okay, boom, you're free. Yeah, but I don't have any clothes. I don't have any way to sustain myself. I don't have any land. I don't have any wealth. You see what I mean? I mean, look at this chart from W.B. Du Bois. Do you understand that in 1860, less than 1% of Black people were free? Look at this chart. The red section are those who are free, those Black people who are free. And you see it goes from 1790, but it's always less than a percentage. That's less than a percentage of the population was free. And then you have this precipitous ramp up to this 100% before 1870, right? Coming after the 1865 liberation of enslavement. I should say quote unquote, because as you know, some, particularly here in Texas, still weren't granted their freedom. So if you look at this chart, though, you see, I mean, can you just understand that one day you're on an enslaver's plantation, the next day you're free? Can you understand the psychological trauma associated with that? You have been raped, you have been bludgeoned for generations, and now you're free. And now, all over the US, the constant cry was, oh man, I get emotional. The constant cry from whites was, what are we going to do about this Negro problem? What are we going to do about the Negro problem? We were how in the world is it that we were the problem, y'all? Let me just read this from W.B. Du Bois, The Souls of Black Folks. Between me and the other world, there is ever an unmasked question, unmasked by some through feelings of delicacy, but others through the difficulty of rightly framing it, all nevertheless flutter round it. They approach me in a half hesitant sort of way, eye me curiously and compassionately, and then instead of saying directly, how does it feel to be a problem? They say, I know an excellent colored man in my town, or I fought at Mechanicsville, or do not these Southern outrage make your blood boil? At these I smile, or am interested, or reduce the boiling to a simmer as the occasion may require. To the real question, how does it feel to be a problem? I answer seldom a word. The Negro problem. So here again, this is a framing of our state of being as a problem, but it's a framing of us being a problem by them. What I want us to realize, beloveds, is we were never the problem. We aren't the problem today. We are an infinitely great people. And I'm not even talking about the fact that we are, in some cases, and in many cases, we are the progeny of kings and queens. I'm just talking about our inherent greatness as melanated people. Do you understand that our genes are the dominant genes? Do you understand that black man procreates with a white woman, makes a black baby? Black woman, white man, black baby. Do you understand that we were ordained by God to have this dominant gene? Now, I don't want you to hear black supremacy. That's not what I'm talking about because that's hateful. I'm not talking about hateful. I'm talking about love. I'm talking about it is what it is. Scientifically, this is what it is. We are a great people. We have constantly been made to feel like we aren't, made to feel like we're the problem, but we're not. Let's continue with Omar's story. Like I said before, Guyasi was part of this Freedmen's Bureau. Freedmen's Bureau was this collection of black freed men and women that sought to make things better for their people. In 1866, what I'm showing right here is the Abraham Lincoln School for freedmen in New Orleans. They were building schools, y'all. So this is another one. This is another his story. It's not our story. Our story is that right out of enslavement, we were building schools. So certainly we can do it today. So I continue. The Freedmen's Bureau had originally instituted a plan that required all Louisiana residents to pay a 5% tax to support these schools, but many whites protested so a system in which only freedmen paid the tax was replaced. They did not want to pay a tax to help these newly freed enslaved people to gain education. So here is another case of us being denied reparations. More on that later. This tax created an extra burden on an already impoverished populace, agents observed. Walker reported that the Shreveport and Natchitoches school buildings were obtained with no rent required, but George Ruby, another agent who went on to become a prominent African American political leader in Texas, wrote of a different situation further east in Amity Station in St. Helena Parish. There are a large number of freedmen in the vicinity working the sawmills and elsewhere all willing to sustain and anxious who are all willing to sustain and anxious about their schools and are anxious about their schools. But the trouble is, just now their people, through laboring, have little means. The Jefferson Parish agent noted that he had reasoned and explained to the laborers the great necessity of education, but that many objected to paying a tax that wasn't being universally enforced. According to the report in Harper's Weekly, the Abraham Lincoln School in New Orleans, with a faculty of 14 teachers, enrolled more than 800 freedmen when it opened in 1865. Within 6 months, however, the school system instated a monthly tuition fee of $1.50, and the number of both students and teachers were decreased by half. I want to show you the link between wealth and our freedom. I want to show over and over the link between wealth and freedom. Wealth and freedom. You see here where the freedmen had fought to open this school. You had nearly 800 children enrolled in the school, and because of this tax, they couldn't afford to pay a tuition, $1.50 tuition. Can you understand how this is so unfair? Meanwhile, because of the Homesteading Act, we're literally at the same time, y'all, at the same time, we're bringing over Europeans to claim land. Let's continue. So now we come to a New Orleans somewhere around 1950. By now, man, look at Omar. Omar is actually a lawyer on Claiborne Street in the Treme area of New Orleans. This is the area in New Orleans where many, many, many Black businesses, hundreds of Black businesses were erected. And you had Black shops, you had Black groceries, and you had Black seamstresses, and clubs, of course. You had lawyers, doctors, funeral homes. We had a bustling Black economy. I'm giving the story of Omar and I'm giving the story in New Orleans. Of course, this was the same in Tulsa. Of course, this was the same in Harlem, in Detroit, and other places all throughout the US. The same thing was happening. When given just a little bit of a chance, we built businesses, we built schools. This is what I'm showing you. So stop letting folks say things like, well, our problem is we don't value education. Of course we value education. We don't have any economic center. We had economic centers and they destroyed them. They terrorized, or in the case of the Treme area, New Orleans, they literally ran an interstate right through it and they called it urban renewal. Let's read here. You got stuck with what came your way. The interstate became a reality because of the haves and the have-nots, and the have-nots got stuck with the interstate. Within the system, there was essentially no one in government to defend the Black community and communicate the cultural and economic necessity of keeping Claiborne intact. And outside the system, those who were active political organizers were busy with more pressing things. Dodie Smith Simmons was a member of the local chapter of NAACP. She says the Claiborne Interstate was just not a focus because we were focusing on the five and dime store, the restaurants. Then it was the Freedom Ride. In the mid-60s, they were working to end segregation for the right to walk into any restaurant they wanted, go to any school they wanted, and feel safe no matter where they stood. Trees and flowers and grass was not our main interest at that time. we can, when you know better, you do better. We had so much then, y'all. We had it then. Could we have fought for the right to be in their stores while still maintaining ours? Or did it have to be a either or proposition? I don't know the answer to that, but I will say this. Clearly, the either or proposition was aided by the fact of terrorism in the case of places like Tulsa and just being zoned into extinction, like the case of New Orleans in the Treme area. More. Before North Claiborne Avenue was home to a bustling business district. It was estimated more than 120 businesses ran along the corridor with hundreds of oak trees lining the way, much like St. Charles Avenue today. But to build a highway, the state took over several properties along Claiborne between Tulane and St. Bernard Avenues. Some referred to it as the monster. And then look at today, you have precious little left. You have what we call the Municipal Auditorium, and you have this Armstrong Park, which was never supposed to be fenced in. So I find it notable that what was once a very open and free area is now fenced in. I find it notable that what was once a very wealthy area is now, for blacks, impoverished. Do you see how it is so important how freedom, economic freedom, the freedom to own land, to own businesses, do you see how this is so important to wealth? And do you see how we were systematically shut out of this wealth? The picture I'm painting for you is that it wasn't by our own devices, y'all. And we're old for this. Of course, we can walk and chew gum. We're going to talk about ways that with whatever finances we have, we can build this into wealth. We also want to always talk about the terrorism that our parents and grandparents, great grandparents, endured in this land and how we are due reparations because of it. So we want to do both. We want to seek reparations and we want to learn how to build the wealth that we have. By way of reparations, I just want to read from Sean D. Rochester's book, The Black Tax. This should be required reading, y'all. Pick up this book today. Anyway, I'm on page 82 in The Black Tax. I just want to quantify the cost of enslavement and up to the sharecropping era. So we're going from 1619 to 1870. So if you see picture there, you see enslavement was $50 trillion. Present value of said labor during that time was 22 trillion. The Homesteading Act, which I talked about, that cost us 1.6 trillion in lost land that should have been ours. And then sharecropping in Jim Crow society, that was another $15 trillion, which brings us to a total just in that part of our atrocities that we bore. That's $88.6 trillion in reparations that we are owed. I hope you enjoyed this little walk down our lovely history. Some, and of course, all of it wasn't lovely, but we are such an awesome people that we were able to craft businesses, families, even out of those ruins. We're going to pick up this story next time. We're going to talk about Dorinda, who is actually the daughter of Omar. And Dorinda's going to take us into the civil rights era. Going to take us right into the Black Power 70s. We're going to just talk about more ramifications as related to those times and our economic freedom and our wealth. I hope that you enjoyed this walk. I hope that you enjoyed this discussion. Please take a look at our former discussion on Guyasi if you didn't get a chance to take a look at that. And also take a look at some current detractors of our freedom where we talked about our beloved Shakari Richardson. So take a look at those two. And I look forward to talking to you real soon. We're going to have another great discussion. In the comments, please answer some of the questions if you have, or answer some of the questions that I asked, or if you have more questions of me as far as the history in New Orleans and other places about the freedmen, anything, or about Sean Rochester's book. Please, let's have a really great discussion, everybody. Talk to you really soon. I love you, beloveds.